Welcome everybody back to Spinnerack. Today I'm here with my boy,
PD
Prime Minister. Hey, Prime Minister, today we're going to be talking about Watchmen. I mean, we're going to be delving into the history and some of the things that we've been seeing in Watchmen to get a better understanding. And of course, there can be no one else who's a premier Watchmen guy but my boy, the Prime Minister himself. Okay?
I know some Watchmen things. I don't know everything on there, but
he's being modest.
Some of the pieces to the puzzle is in this Absolute Edition, Absolute Watchmen. So, but ultimately, there's a TV show that everyone's loving. It's the HBO's number one show right now, The Watchmen by
Damon
Lindelof.
Sorry for butchering your name.
This is our first name, the first name we've used.
We butcher names. That's why we don't say many of them.
The Watchmen was created by Alan Moore and David Gibbons. And at the same time...
What about Higgins?
John Higgins, the colorist.
But you were right. You said the right thing. You just were not sure. You should have been sure.
But anyway, that's why we have the books here. So ultimately, we want to talk about this. We've gone over some episodes. We're liking the show or we're indifferent. And there's been a lot of things that are coming up with the fans of saying of its wokeism and this and the other. And we want to go through the history of Hooded Justice. Now, Hooded Justice in the comic is a minor character. He shows up and in a scene where he's in like a crowd picture. And in the side part of the picture, there's a moment more for the comedian, where the comedian comes in and he sneaks up on the original Silk Spectre and she's dressing. She said, I needed to dress. She said, no, you told me you were dressing. That meant that you were interested in something. And that turns into a violent event that Hooded Justice saves her from. But at the same time, the comedian turns to him and says, that's basically saying that Hooded Justice gets off on beating up people. And he has a shocking moment where we see his eyes. And just like this, we see his eyes. And this is something that the TV plays off of. So you see his eyes and then he kind of backs off. Now, I just want to do a slight sidebar because in the movie, which was Zack Snyder, he updated that scene, making it more an easy go. It made it a little better for the movie audience because Hooded Justice doesn't stop when when he says, "Oh, you get off of this." He's like, "What?" And he just stops
wailing on him.
He goes even worse. And which I was like, yeah, that was one of the scenes I had a problem with. But it's a very tough scene telling you that the comedian is a very rough character. He's a very extremely rough character, but we're not talking about him. We just want to give you the basic scene, and there's only a hint. They hint at what his origin is, but it's not clearly, they don't know who he actually was. But when we start watching the Watchmen TV show, it opens up with Sister Night. That's the poster. We have Regina King as Sister Night, and she's the premier character of this Watchmen TV show. So this has garnered a lot of what I initially first said was the wokeism, saying, oh, look, a black character, a hood. Now think about that. I just said hood, and we have Hooded Justice. So they're really screaming to us, don't look at the icing, look at the cake. Figure, if you're going to say, oh, they're trying to do black person in the hood, you're trying to go to what today, like, no, they're saying connect the dots. And one thing I didn't even see at the same time, they're telling you connect the dots all through it. They're doing a mystery in plain sight.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely doing that, and you can definitely see the type of hood that kind of throws people off, because that type of hood is like, yo, wait a second, what the hell is coming on? Even though the color of the hood is a different color. Mm-hmm. So the thought is, and I'm not sure what Moore's original ideas regarding Hooded Justice was, but of course, they've changed what we see and how we interpret it. But also you see Sister Night, where she has a hood, and it's a different type of hood. Mm-hmm. And it's a hood that's more contemporary, and what we have a different type of understanding. So, of course, Prime Minister is going to delve more into this.
Well, I only want to say that when the first episode, she also has a mask, which we see she sprays on. She has some sort of, I guess she obviously probably uses Vaseline so she could spray on her face and she could wipe it off with ease. That's just a sidebar, but that's another red herring, another bit for you to remember for later. So going into the first episode.
Good point. That's a very good point, Whereas you see the eyes here. Here she's covering her eyes, and it's pretty interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Like I said, we don't call him NYPD for nothing, bro.
Oh my gosh, that hurt. So the first thing we see a old school movie like playing, and we see a kid watching a movie, and we get to see, which before I kept forgetting the name. I just remember Reeves, but the classic lawman Bass Reeves, a film of his in there where he has a hood on, and he's disguising himself, and he captures it was the sheriff that
was a sheriff,
doing stuff to the town, and he reveals himself, and it's like, oh, it's Bass Reeves, and he's cheered and this, that, and the other, and this is an actual person in history.
Yes, it is.
So I would like to pass this off to our historian, who knows all things history, American and overseas. Now, what pieces of the puzzle are here that they're showing us, like as a hint to saying, well, who is Bass Reeves?
I mean, Bass Reeves was a lawman. He was one of the first deputy marshals in United States history. There is thought that there were others that could have been made marshals past the Mississippi, but east of the Mississippi, he was definitely the very first one, and definitely the one with the most renown. He was able to capture 3,000 fugitives. 3,000. That number is ridiculously huge over his course of his 30+ years of law enforcement. There are many stories of where he would, they said he would wipe himself, he would disguise himself and capture the bad guys and figure out where they're going to go and go there before others. So he was a really successful detective. And this was mostly in the Oklahoma territory. And this also plays into the whole thing in Tulsa, the whole burning down, the destruction of what they call Black Wall Street.
Sorry about that part.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Before we get to that part, we want to just highlight that Hollywood hasn't done a film on Bass Reeves, but we have someone that's been attributed to Bass Reeves' history, which is the Lone Ranger. Now, the Lone Ranger, hinting the same, because in some of the documents you can find online, they've highlighted that he had one Native American partner that would help him on this. Besides, as Mara said, that he knew a network of the Native Americans in the land of this Native American territories that he was policing. So it's interesting that they're also letting us know that there's possible false history. So you have that, and if you think of, that's the thing, you're supposed, as a red herring, you're supposed to pick out, like, oh, okay, Sister Night has a black mask like the Lone Ranger. So it's like keying you into something that's going to lead up to something later. But it wasn't until I got to episode, I think it's 6, where I was like, oh, they gave us that bit, and I didn't figure it out, because they're letting us know that there's a false history on him, like he's represented as another character.
Right.
So I'm not putting all these pieces together, but it's coming together slowly. So once we see that, when I'm at Comic-Con and I see the next scene, which is actually the massacre of 1912 in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And we get to see this terrible image. And can you go into that also?
I mean, it was a terrible image. It was this whole town in Tulsa, where the section where African Americans were very prosperous and successful, had businesses, that they started, the white residents, or a group of white residents came in there and started lynching and burning and practically destroyed the whole town. Hundreds of people were hurt. Several people were killed, and it was a shame. But this is a facet of our history that people didn't know currently, or was swept under the rug. And so what we're saying here isn't necessarily that, whoa, so one of the controversies people are saying is like, why they're bringing this up, and was this true? Just because you haven't heard it before doesn't mean it wasn't true. I mean, we focus on history. There's a lot to focus on in history. There are different facets of history, and sometimes certain things get papered over certain things. And depending on who is in charge or who's writing the history books, they decide what they think is important to put in there.
Well, for me, watching it, I knew ultimately as a viewer, I want a little more bite to my drama, and we can like kind of whitewash the true word of kind of simplify history. But this is the history of hooded justice in this story, right? And we slowly get to see through the imagery, through the video of American Hero Story, and we get to see in the ending of it, which ends with Louis Gossett Jr. as Will Reeves having hung the chief of police in Don Johnson's character. So we know that this is that character, and this massacre in Tulsa is almost his Superman story, where this tragedy happens and he's sent off the sole, well, he's not actually the sole survivor, but sort of the sole survivor of this massacre, and he exits at the town as a little boy. But this is tougher because he isn't with anyone. He's almost walking with maybe another kid or a sister. He just, not like, I guess not sister, but he's walking, and this is a like shifting, giving Superman symbolism, but like a little bit different because he isn't found initially. We don't see him get found yet. So this is a powerful, we know this is going to become, we can clearly see this is going to be the history of hooded justice.
But we see and just to remind, the Tulsa, it was a 1921 massacre, I believe it was. But it's the whole thing, though, when he was coming out with somebody out of that whole massacre.
Yes.
So it's just as him, and this person will definitely play a very important role in the future of hooded justice.
So that is the character that shows up later?
Yes, that is the character.
I wasn't sure.
That's the one his wife.
Okay.
That would become his wife in the future.
That's a strong point. But we're still...
So the connections are between hooded justice and Sister Night are strong because we finally see what happens. Because in essence, I mean, I don't know if you want to say
okay, well, we're not going. We're staying with this character. We're saying that, but that's good that we cleared that up. So we got the history that this character, Will Reeves, survived this massacre, and he moved on, and he's possibly Lou Gossett Jr. Well, we figured this out at that point. So where are we at now? So then that's when we have Regina King's character runs into the old man, the Louis Gossett, Will Reeves, in a wheelchair, and he has the same colors as Hooded Justice. So at this point, we're like, okay, this is the origin of Hooded Justice. But at the same time, we're saying to ourselves, Hooded Justice is a white guy.
Yeah.
So then I think in the second episode, because they show you the image of Hooded Justice, and we get to see that in the commercial that's passing by that it is a white guy. So we're like, oh, we figured all this stuff out, but how are they going to make this into that? And then this turns into what people would call character swapping and all that other stuff. So that's where people go into the wokeism, but it's like, no, we're going to get into some other heavy stuff here. So from that point, you also later in the image we see Sister Night. She's in, she puts on an outfit. She's, sprays her eyes. She's beating up people just like Hooded Justice. But in the second episode, we get to see a little more of that film, American History Story, and we get to say, all right, Hooded Justice is a white guy,
without a doubt.
But how the hell is this? But then it's a movie. So once you got a movie, that's when they start to let you go back to the Bass Reeves things, because it's like, if you imagine in our present day, the Lone Ranger is a long-standing figure in history, but some of the plot lines borrowing from Bass Reeves, this is sort of the American History Story is the Hollywood version, like almost like the ID Network, the basic like Hollywood version of this history, like all of the things that we know, the heroism, and obviously this is a darker world, so they get into a lot of darker elements. We get to see, another clip from it with Hooded Justice and who was that in Captain Metropolis, and we're like, oh, they're going to what's under the hood. So once we get to Under the Hood, which is in not in the first at least 3 or 4 issues of the Watchmen, they have this book which is Under the Hood, which is sort of an overview, and it lists Hooded Justice. He has more time in the Under the Hood story where they hint how he was the first superhero, how he did something in Queens, and this, that, and the other. So it's like, stuff was happening in Tulsa. How does this relate to being in New York City and all this other stuff? So they hint that. Then they also have a scene where Hooded Justice is found out that they found out that he has this past, but he beats up this cop, and that's when you're getting into it. And it's like they're really giving Hooded Justice a Watchmen style history, where Hooded Justice in this book, they say a hint that he's just some circus performer, like a nobody,
right,
who becomes like the first hero of the Watchmen universe. And
Key issue, the first hero of the Watchmen universe.
And at the same time, you have Rorschach, who has this heavily involved history where it's a surprise who he is, or Dr. Manhattan. So Hooded Justice didn't really have a Watchmen-style origin. So it feels like you're going to get it, but we had this one last hurdle. How do we figure the black guy and the white guy? How do you make those things? This is just basic, going back to the wokeism, and that's what people are on. But I want to just say, before we get to that episode, which would be episode 6, that one of the things that one of Alan Moore's strongest styles of storytelling is a thing which comic book writers call everything you know is a lie, where he took the Swamp Thing and went from Swamp Thing being a man and then finding out that that was actually an illusion. The Swamp Thing was always this creature, but he thought he was a man. I think the story is called Anatomy Lesson. You can correct me on this, but the idea was that what his
you'll be corrected if.
But I'm saying the idea that his history wasn't actually what we thought it was. And I think the same instance for Supreme. A lot of times, Alan Moore has played that sort of angle. So this sort of subject matter is right in line of a retcon, is right in line of what Alan Moore would do, actually giving Hooded Justice a more interesting origin than just being a circus performer that just wanted to beat the hell out of people. So when we get to episode 6, he's a cop. He's not the first black cop, but he's a cop. He wants to do good work, but they don't really want him to do anything. They sideline.
It's Will Reeves.
Will Reeves from the boy from the early part is now cop. No, well, we can get into it, but we can get into too much about Sister Night taking the nostalgia pills and hearing the memories. But that's something we're just doing a character overview.
Right.
She's getting all of his memories, and she's going through his life right before he became Hooded Justice.
And that was the nostalgia pills, was just a way for us to go and get exposition of the character already. So that's what we have there. But it's pretty interesting. We see Will. He's made it north, it basically mirrors the migration from the south to the north. Yeah. During which helped to flower the Harlem Renaissance. The Great Migration, which again is not totally covered again.
Yeah.
We talk about people coming through Ellis Island and stuff like that, but the Great Migration from the south, because of Jim Crow laws, the difficulty of farming, the manufacturing jobs up north, the greater freedoms. Well, there was a lot of racism there too, but a lot of people coming up, and that's one thing that isn't covered. And this is what happens. We see him now in New York, in the city. It's New York, in the city, and he's become a lawman. Why? Because in those films that he was watching, who was he watching?
Yes, here we go.
Bass Reeves.
They're just screaming at us.
And so what name is he taking?
Will Reeves.
He changed it to Reeves because that was somebody that he found. That was his superhero. That was his guy.
So in this part,
wait, one last thing. Who does he have living with him now? The young baby that he found. That's the woman he ends up marrying.
Yes. So in this portion, he can't do his job as a police officer. They're kind of sidelining him. This images, we're starting to see the scene that was in the American History Stories thing, but we know it's a white guy. So it's like, okay, at this point, I figured that it's a puff piece. That what they're showing, they don't have the exact history, but I haven't figured all the, how they're going to do it. So when you get to that point, he has decided, he gets roughed up by the cops. They hint the stuff, they even do more storytelling because they have the Cyclops and it's hinting what happened in this story and saying there's a long history, longer than we would ever know. So now they as a sidebar, they've expanded this so much. Before Watchmen did, but they've expanded it differently where they can just have fun in the present and in the past. They can go into other characters like Captain Metropolis, who shows up in this series. They can do a lot. So that's just a sidebar. But at this point, he realizes he can't fight crime the way he wants to. And in the moment of, after being hung.
Yeah, so what happened is that he is trying to, they're letting go of people who shouldn't be let go of. And they're basically some type of conspiracy. He recognizes that there's something going on in the department. They're telling him, as one of the African American characters, to just stay away from this while they do what they're doing. So the cops then come by, that he's making trouble. So they come by and you see them dragging behind the car.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You also, the symbolism with the nostalgia is giving you the Tulsa stuff.
Yeah.
And they actively hang him, but they don't finish the job. They just
It was a warning.
They give him a warning, but he still has. They drop him off back in the alley, and he still has the mask, and he sees a crime happening, and he he decides to fight crime with the mask on. And people don't assume, they just assume it's a vigilante. They don't factor in black or anything like that. And if you look in the comic,
but he saved the first people he fights and save are two white characters.
Yes.
And so that's pretty interesting in and of itself. And that he does that, and then that's where people just start assuming.
Yes.
He sees these people getting robbed by some young toughs, and he feels, even though he's been beating, even though, by his own fellow cops, he has to step in, he has to do something. And this is what a hero does. Even though you're reluctant about certain things, you know what's right and wrong, and the moral compass pushes you to doing the right thing. And so that's what he does.
So at this part, he's decided that he's going to take on the Cyclops. This thing that the cops have been going through, and they're not going to allow. No, after that happens,
he starts going after crime, and then he goes after.
But before he gets met by Captain Metropolis, and Captain Metropolis is like, you joining us, we can actually do something. And he started like saying, I can deal with the cops, the Cyclops, this history that may be going back to 1921. And Captain Metropolis is all for it. And he's like, you being the first one. And this is another sidebar. In here, like, I know people make a lot about the pirate comic books.
Right.
But in Under the Hood, they also talk about the first comic, which is Action Comics. So Action Comics is actually listed in here before Hooded Justice. No, Hooded Justice is the year before that. But they have it so you get the Action Comics, that sort of thing going on. So it's a slight change, but it has most of the stuff in there just shifted a little. So when Hooded Justice, and we get the classic shot of the Hooded Justice with the Minutemen, but he has the idea instead of going in there as a black man, he colors his eyes in this area, and that's similar to Sister Night. We have him giving us the image, sort of different, the same. You couldn't, getting this sort of the white makeup. Would it play off, or would it be that ultimately they wouldn't assume it was a black guy? That's what they're trying to do. And he's there to fight over this. And they also have other parts of the history and Under the Hood, saying that Captain Metropolis and Hooded Justice had a relationship. It's just different from what it was in the comic books, where in the comic books they're both dressed up and it's all this thing. Where Hooded Justice comes, he has this relationship with Captain Metropolis, but he wants to do good. So you get the kinky stuff that's in there that's saying that these guys are about being kinky, and that was Night Owl that's saying that. And then you also have him, but he's kind of let down. That he can't, they're just for the show, and he's like, I really have to do something.
And the Prime Minister has a good point in that what we see also here is that one of the reasons that the relationship develops is that he doesn't really want to do it. He's out there fighting crime, he's starting to go after the Cyclops, and he wants to bring these things down. But Captain Manhattan basically says, with our resources coming together, you're the first guy, the whole audience, the whole people are interested, they support you. So us coalescing as a team together, you coming with us would give us legitimacy.
Yes.
So it's not just, they all got together equally. No, he was the guy in the front, and he was going to give the rest of them legitimacy because people have been seeing him do things in the forefront. And so when he comes out and, his eyes are covered over, and everybody assumes, like all the other heroes, he is also one of them. He's white, just like the rest of them. So no one comes to think like, hey, I don't think anyone else knew that he was black.
Right.
Only Captain
Metropolis
knew, and that was it. And that's because they had a relationship. So the initial thing is that he wanted to do it because as a team they could go after the Cyclops. But it was all a trick. He just wanted to form the team and be out there.
All for show.
Yeah,
all for show. And that leads him in the part. And his wife is almost saying you should stay with the mask. And he sees his son make the eyes, and he's just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Yeah. But the Cyclops, they have a plan bigger than we knew, and they cause another terrible event, which causes black people to flip out in the movie theaters and start killing each other, and you're like, and this
It's
is
mesmerizing. It's like
it's
watching the movie, like some type
but
of his
one
notes just have memorizing.
yes, but that's the thing. In Watchmen, it's a realistic, but over the top comic book, because the Cyclops, they're mirroring that the Cyclops plot is the space alien is sort of like a octopus Cyclops sort of like a super villain plot, like the stuff you'd find in a comic book, and they're sort of mirroring that sort of thing in there. So it's very interesting that they got to this part, which is episode 6, and they had this big event happen in this time, and it's from something simple, which would be mesmerizing them using lights and saying history of saying film and TV, like film would be actually poisoning people. And that's people feel like, oh no, this is like kind of dumbing down and kind of, I think a lot of the literature and the complaints about television led to that. So they're sort of pushing that fear that people had, pushing it even further. So when we have this big fight with Hooded Justice and the Klan or the Cyclops, and we get to see him almost pay back, and it's a real, and they also go to Hooded Justice being this character that likes to just kick people's teeth in. And it goes and it mirrors back to when he goes into the bar, it goes into the deli, and everything that we've seen in the American hero story is here, but not where we remember it. So it's letting us know that history is somehow a little bit different than what actually happens. We get to see cool effects. We see Hooded Justice jump out side of the window, and ultimately we now know that this is his history. Now, there's 2 bits that this basically the character we have so far. We're at episode 7. We haven't seen episode 8 yet, and at the same time, there's only 2 bits that I haven't mentioned yet that we would reference for here. And let me see. I wanted to go with the other one first, but at this point, Louis Gossett Jr. His character is clearly, we know that he's that character. We know that now, even in his old age, he can be Hooded Justice in a wheelchair because he has this mesmerizing thing. And they show you how he takes out the chief of police, and we now know that everything is sort of clear to us. We haven't had Sister Night and Hooded Justice meet up again. We've only had the kind of bantering where what's the name? She wasn't believing him, but she wasn't ready to toss him to the dogs. So that was interesting. But then at the same time, if you go into this book, they have the character interviews of all of the original designs and all the original stuff for the Watchmen, and I think there's 8 of them. Mm-hmm. All of them have, even though Ross Ash looks a little different, they have a picture of Hooded Justice, and his name is Brother Knight. So once I read that, I was like,
wow.
Oh, okay. I thought they just came up with some cheesy name for Regina King, and it's like, no, this connects to this bit where they said, oh, which is basically like comics where writers go in and they're just like, oh, sweat, here's this, let me make a story out of it. What would Brother Knight actually be? If he's in what they say in 1938, this coincides with everything, like you said, Mike.